The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Princess Charlotte ran through the corridors, tears streaming down her rosy cheeks. Her small feet pattered against the cold stone as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, its once pristine white fur now damp from her tears. Charlotte had always been known as the spirited one among the royal children. At 8 years old, she possessed a curiosity that often led her into places she shouldn't be, and situations that made her parents worry. But today was different. Today, something had happened that shook her to her very core. The trouble had started during her morning lessons with Mrs. Henderson, her strict governess. Charlotte had been practicing her curtsy, a skill that every royal child must master before their 9th birthday. But when she tried to perform the elegant bow that generations of princesses before her had perfected, something went terribly wrong. Instead of the graceful curtsy expected of a princess, Charlotte had stumbled backward, knocking over a priceless vase that had belonged to Queen Victoria herself. The crash echoed through the lesson room like thunder, and Mrs. Henderson's face had turned white as snow. "Princess Charlotte," the governess had gasped, staring at the shattered pieces scattered across the Persian rug. "This vase has been in the royal collection for over 150 years. Charlotte's bottom lip had begun to quiver as she looked at the broken porcelain. She knew she was in serious trouble. The vase wasn't just any ordinary decoration. It was a piece of history, irreplaceable and precious beyond measure. Mrs. Henderson had immediately sent word to Prince William and Catherine, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss Charlotte's unacceptable behavior. The governess had used words like careless and unfit for a princess and disgraceful conduct. Each word had felt like a sharp stone thrown at Charlotte's heart. Now, as she ran through the palace halls, Charlotte felt completely alone. She couldn't face her parents, knowing how disappointed they would be. She couldn't return to Mrs. Henderson, who looked at her as if she were a common troublemaker rather than a princess. The weight of her mistake felt heavier than the crown jewels themselves. The palace seemed enormous and empty as Charlotte continued running. Portraits of stern-looking ancestors stared down at her from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to judge her every step. She passed the grand staircase where her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had once walked with such dignity and grace. How different Charlotte felt from those elegant royal women who never seemed to make mistakes. Her sobs grew louder as she rounded another corner, her vision blurred by tears. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed to find someone, anyone who might understand. Someone who wouldn't look at her with disappointment or shame. The palace guards had always been kind to her, she remembered. They would smile and nod when she passed by during her daily walks. Some of them even had children of their own. Maybe, just maybe, one of them would know what to do. Charlotte's small hand wiped at her nose as she made a decision that would change everything. She would find one of the royal guards and ask for help. It didn't matter that it went against everything she had been taught about proper royal protocol. It didn't matter that princesses were supposed to handle their problems through official channels and proper procedures. All that mattered was that she needed help, and she needed it now. With determined steps despite her tears, Charlotte headed toward the main entrance where she knew the guards would be stationed. Her heart pounded with both fear and hope as she prepared to do something no royal child had ever done before. Guard Captain James Morrison had been protecting the royal family for 15 years. Standing at 6 feet tall with graying hair and kind blue eyes, he had seen many things during his service, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of Princess Charlotte appearing at the main entrance. Tears flowing freely down her face and her small body shaking with sobs. James was conducting his routine inspection of the guard posts when he heard the soft sound of crying. He turned to see the young princess standing near the large oak doors, looking lost and frightened. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her royal blue dress was wrinkled from running. Every instinct told James to follow protocol. When a member of the royal family appeared distressed, the proper procedure was to immediately contact their private secretary, who would then inform the appropriate family members. Guards were trained to maintain respectful distance and never engage directly with royals unless specifically instructed. But looking at Charlotte's tear-stained face, James felt his heart breaking. She looked exactly like his own daughter Emma had looked years ago, when she had fallen from her bicycle and scraped her knees. The same helpless expression, the same desperate need for comfort that only a caring adult could provide. Charlotte noticed the tall guard watching her and walked slowly toward him. Her steps were hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she was doing the right thing. When she reached James, she looked up at him with red, puffy eyes. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need help, but I don't know what to do." James felt his professional training warring with his natural compassion. He glanced around quickly to make sure no other staff members were watching, then knelt down to Charlotte's eye level. This simple action broke the first rule of royal protocol. Guards should never position themselves at the same level as royalty. "What's wrong, Your Royal Highness?" James asked gently, using the softest tone he could manage while still maintaining respect. Charlotte's tears flowed faster as she began to tell her story. She explained about the broken vase, about Mrs. Henderson's anger, and about how scared she was to face her parents. Her words came out in rushed, broken sentences between sobs. "Everyone thinks I'm a bad princess," Charlotte hiccuped. "Mrs. Henderson says I'm not fit to be royal. What if she's right? What if I can never be good enough?" James listened carefully to every word, his heart aching for the frightened little girl before him. He could see that this wasn't just about a broken vase. Charlotte was questioning her entire identity and worth as a person. "Your Royal Highness," James said carefully, "may I tell you something about being brave?" Charlotte nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her small hand. "The bravest people I know are not the ones who never make mistakes," James continued. "They are the ones who face their mistakes and try to make things right. And do you know what you just did by coming to ask for help?" Charlotte shook her head, still sniffling. "You showed incredible courage." James smiled warmly. "It takes a very special person to admit when they need help." For the first time that morning, Charlotte's crying began to slow down. She looked at James with curiosity rather than fear. "But I broke something very important," she said, "and Mrs. Henderson thinks I'm terrible." James glanced around again, making sure they were still alone. What he was about to do would break even more protocol rules, but he couldn't let this child suffer alone. "Princess Charlotte," he said quietly, "would you like me to help you figure out how to handle this situation?" Charlotte's eyes widened with hope. "You would do that? Even though I'm in big trouble?" "Especially because you're in trouble," James replied. "That's when people need help the most." As Charlotte nodded eagerly, James realized he was about to embark on something that had never happened before in the history of the Royal Guard. He was about to help a princess solve her personal problems, completely outside the chain of command and proper procedures. But looking at Charlotte's grateful expression, James knew he was making the right choice no matter what consequences might follow. James looked around the grand entrance hall, his mind racing as he tried to figure out the best way to help Charlotte without creating a scandal. He could already imagine the headlines if anyone discovered that a royal guard was counseling a princess without permission. "Princess Charlotte," James said quietly, "first we need to find somewhere private to talk. Can you show me to a place where we won't be disturbed?" Charlotte thought for a moment, then brightened slightly. "There's a small reading room near the library. Mama takes me there sometimes when she wants to talk privately." James nodded and followed Charlotte through the winding corridors of the palace. As they walked, he noticed other staff members they passed looked surprised to see a guard walking casually beside the princess, rather than maintaining the traditional formal distance. The reading room Charlotte led him to was cozy and warm, with soft armchairs and tall windows that let in golden sunlight. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with classic stories and royal biographies. It felt like a safe haven away from the formal atmosphere of the rest of the palace. Charlotte settled into one of the armchairs, her legs not quite reaching the floor. James remained standing, still uncertain about how far he should bend the rules of protocol. "Please sit," Charlotte said, pointing to the chair across from her. "It's hard to talk to someone who's so tall." James hesitated for only a moment before sitting down. In doing so, he crossed another line that no royal guard had crossed before, sitting in the presence of royalty without being invited by a senior family member. "Now," James said, "let's think about this step by step. You broke something valuable by accident, and your governess was upset. Is that right?" Charlotte nodded miserably. "Mrs. Henderson looked at me like I was the worst person in the world. She said the vase was irreplaceable, and that my behavior was unfit for a princess." James could see the pain in Charlotte's eyes as she repeated the harsh words. He remembered his own daughter's teachers who had sometimes been too quick to criticize and too slow to understand. "Princess Charlotte," James said gently, "can I ask you something? When you were practicing your curtsy, were you trying your best?" "Yes," Charlotte said immediately. "I was trying so hard to get it perfect. I wanted Mrs. Henderson to be proud of me. And when you knocked over the vase, did you do it on purpose?" "No." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears again. "I would never break something on purpose. I felt terrible as soon as it happened." James leaned forward slightly. "Then you did nothing wrong with your intentions. Accidents happen to everyone, even adults." "Even me?" Charlotte looked surprised. "You have accidents?" James smiled. "Just last week, I was polishing my uniform buttons and dropped one. It rolled under my bed and I couldn't find it for 2 hours. I was worried I'd get in trouble for having an incomplete uniform." Charlotte giggled softly, the first happy sound she had made all day. "Really?" "Really," James confirmed. "The difference between an accident and bad behavior is whether you meant to cause harm. You didn't mean to break the vase, so you're not a bad person." Charlotte seemed to consider this carefully. "But Mrs. Henderson is still angry with me, and my parents are going to be so disappointed." James nodded thoughtfully. "Those are real concerns, and we should address them. But first, I want you to understand something important. Making a mistake doesn't make you unfit to be a princess. It makes you human." "But princesses are supposed to be perfect," Charlotte protested. "Everyone expects us to never mess up." "Princess Charlotte," James said seriously, "do you know what I think makes a good princess?" Charlotte shook her head, listening intently. "A good princess is someone who cares about others, who tries to do the right thing, and who takes responsibility when things go wrong. From what I've seen, you have all those qualities." Charlotte's posture straightened slightly as she absorbed these words. "You really think so?" "I know so," James replied firmly. "Now shall we figure out together how to handle this situation in a way that shows everyone what a thoughtful princess you truly are?" Charlotte nodded eagerly, her despair beginning to transform into determination. For the first time since the accident, she felt like maybe everything wasn't ruined after all. James watched as Charlotte's face transformed from despair to hope. The change was remarkable. Her shoulders straightened, her breathing became calmer, and the constant stream of tears finally stopped. "What should I do first?" Charlotte asked, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. James thought carefully before answering. "Well, let's think about who was affected by what happened. The vase belonged to your family. Mrs. Henderson was upset and you're feeling terrible. We need to address each of these things." Charlotte nodded seriously as if she were taking mental notes. "That makes sense. First," James continued, "I think you should speak with your parents honestly about what happened. Not because you're in trouble, but because they love you and want to help." "But they're going to be so disappointed," Charlotte worried, her anxiety returning slightly. James shook his head. "Princess Charlotte, can I tell you a secret about parents?" Charlotte leaned forward with curiosity. Parents are much more interested in how their children handle problems than in the problems themselves. If you go to your mama and papa and tell them exactly what happened, and show them that you want to make things right, they'll be proud of your honesty." Charlotte considered this. "Do you really think so?" "I'm certain of it," James assured her. "But there's something else we should do first." "What's that?" James stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens where maintenance workers were tending to the rose bushes. "We should go look at the broken vase together. Sometimes things seem worse in our minds than they actually are." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You want to go back to the lesson room?" "If you're brave enough," James said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes facing the scene of an accident helps us understand exactly what needs to be fixed." Charlotte took a deep breath and stood up. "Okay, I can be brave." As they walked back through the palace corridors toward the lesson room, James noticed that Charlotte walked differently now. Instead of the frantic running and cowering from earlier, she moved with purpose and determination. When they reached the lesson room, Charlotte hesitated at the doorway. The room was empty. Mrs. Henderson had apparently left to report the incident to Charlotte's parents. The broken vase pieces were still scattered across the beautiful rug, looking like white and blue fragments of a puzzle. James knelt down near the broken pieces, being careful not to touch anything. "Princess Charlotte, come look at this." Charlotte approached slowly and knelt beside him. "What do you see?" James asked. Charlotte studied the pieces carefully. It's broken into large pieces, not tiny ones. And look, this part here still has the painted flowers intact. James nodded approvingly. Exactly. This vase isn't destroyed, it's damaged. Do you know what that means? Charlotte's eyes began to sparkle with understanding. It means it might be repairable. That's right, James said. There are experts who specialize in restoring antique porcelain. Your family probably knows several of them. Charlotte stood up. Her entire demeanor changed. So I didn't ruin something irreplaceable forever? Probably not, James confirmed. But even if it can't be perfectly restored, that doesn't change the fact that it was an accident. Charlotte looked at the broken vase pieces with new eyes. Instead of seeing evidence of her failure, she now saw a problem that might have a solution. James, she said, and then caught herself. I mean, Captain Morrison, thank you for helping me see this differently. James smiled at her attempt to return to formal address. Princess Charlotte, you can call me James when we're talking privately like this. And you don't need to thank me. You figured this out yourself. I just helped you look at it from a different angle. Charlotte beamed at him. I'm ready to talk to my parents now. Will you come with me? James felt his heart skip a beat. What Charlotte was asking would be the biggest breach of protocol yet. Guards simply didn't attend private family meetings unless there was a security concern. But looking at Charlotte's hopeful face, James realized that sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than following rules. If your parents agree to it, I'll be honored to come with you, he said. Charlotte smiled brighter than the sun streaming through the lesson room windows. Prince William was pacing in his private study when a soft knock interrupted his worried thoughts. Mrs. Henderson had delivered her report about Charlotte's accident an hour ago, and both he and Catherine had been trying to locate their daughter ever since. Come in, William called out. The door opened to reveal something that made William stop pacing immediately. Charlotte entered the room, her face calm and determined, followed by Captain Morrison in his formal uniform. The sight was so unexpected that William found himself momentarily speechless. Papa, Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. I need to talk to you and Mama about what happened this morning. I asked Captain Morrison to come with me because he helped me understand some important things. Catherine appeared in the doorway, having heard voices. She looked equally surprised to see the unusual pair standing in their private study. Charlotte, darling, Catherine said gently, we've been looking everywhere for you. Mrs. Henderson told us about the accident. Charlotte took a deep breath, exactly as James had coached her to do when she felt nervous. I know she did, Mama, and I'm ready to tell you everything that happened, including what I learned afterward. William exchanged a glance with Catherine, both of them curious about this mature version of their daughter, who had apparently replaced the panicked child from earlier. Please, both of you sit down, William said, gesturing to the comfortable sofas near the fireplace. He then looked at James with uncertainty. Captain Morrison, I'm not sure what your role is in this situation. James stood at attention. Your Royal Highness Princess Charlotte was distressed and asked for my assistance. I realize this is highly irregular, but I felt it was important to help her work through her feelings about the incident. Catherine looked between James and Charlotte with growing understanding. Charlotte, did you go to Captain Morrison because you were afraid to come to us? Charlotte shook her head quickly. No, Mama. I was afraid, but not of you and Papa. I was afraid of disappointing you. Captain Morrison helped me realize that hiding from problems makes them bigger, not smaller. William sat down heavily, processing this information. In his years as a royal, he had never heard of a guard providing personal counseling to a family member. Yet looking at Charlotte's composed demeanor, he couldn't deny that whatever James had done had helped their daughter immensely. Tell us what happened, sweetheart, Catherine said, settling onto the sofa and patting the cushion beside her. Charlotte sat next to her mother and began her story. But this time, instead of the tearful, panicked version she might have told earlier, she spoke clearly and thoughtfully. I was practicing my curtsy for Mrs. Henderson, and I was trying very hard to make it perfect. But when I went backward, I lost my balance and bumped into the table. The vase fell and broke into several large pieces. She paused, looking at both parents. I know the vase was very old and valuable. I know Mrs. Henderson was upset, and I know I made a mistake. But Captain Morrison helped me understand that accidents aren't the same as bad behavior. William leaned forward, intrigued by his daughter's mature analysis. Charlotte continued. Captain Morrison and I went back to look at the broken vase together. He helped me see that it might be repairable, because it broke into large pieces instead of tiny ones, and even if it can't be fixed perfectly, that doesn't mean I'm a bad princess. Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes, but these were tears of pride, not sadness. Charlotte, what you just told us shows incredible wisdom and courage. Captain Morrison taught me that good princesses aren't people who never make mistakes, Charlotte said, looking directly at James with gratitude. Good princesses are people who take responsibility and try to make things right. William stood up and walked over to James, who immediately straightened to full attention. Captain Morrison, what you did today was completely against protocol. James's heart sank. He had known this moment would come, and he prepared himself for the consequences of his actions. However, William continued, it was also exactly what my daughter needed. You helped her find her courage and her wisdom. That's not something I can criticize. James felt relief flood through him, but he remained at attention. Charlotte jumped up from the sofa. Papa, Captain Morrison broke the rules to help me. Does that make him brave too? William looked at his daughter, then at the guard who had risked his career to comfort a frightened child. Yes, Charlotte, that makes him very brave indeed. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had just happened. A centuries-old tradition of royal protocol had been broken, but in its place, something more valuable had been created, a moment of genuine human connection that had helped a young princess discover her own strength. 3 weeks later, the palace buzzed with quiet excitement as Charlotte stood in the same lesson room where her accident had occurred. But this time she wasn't alone with Mrs. Henderson. Her parents, Captain Morrison and a distinguished elderly man named Mr. Pemberton, were all gathered around a table where something remarkable was taking place. Mr. Pemberton, one of Europe's finest antique restoration experts, was carefully applying the final touches to Queen Victoria's vase. The cracks were barely visible, held together with a special adhesive that would last for centuries. The painted flowers looked as vibrant as they had over 150 years ago. Princess Charlotte, Mr. Pemberton said with a warm smile. Would you like to do the honors? Charlotte looked at the small brush he offered her, then at her parents for permission. William nodded encouragingly. With steady hands that showed none of the nervousness from 3 weeks before, Charlotte carefully painted a tiny line of protective coating over the final repair. It was symbolic more than necessary, but everyone in the room understood the importance of the moment. Perfect, Mr. Pemberton declared. This vase will last another 150 years, and its story is now even richer because of its journey through repair and renewal. Mrs. Henderson, who had watched the entire restoration process, stepped forward. Over the past weeks, she had undergone her own transformation. Seeing how Charlotte had handled the crisis with such maturity had opened the governess's eyes to the young princess's true character. Princess Charlotte, Mrs. Henderson said formally, I owe you an apology. I reacted with anger instead of understanding when the accident occurred. You have shown me what true royal behavior looks like, taking responsibility, seeking help when needed, and working to make things right. Charlotte smiled graciously at her governess. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I learned a lot from this experience, too. Prince William cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. This situation has taught our family something important about traditions and rules. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can do is know when to set aside protocol in service of something more important. He looked directly at James, who stood at respectful attention near the window. Captain Morrison, William continued, your actions 3 weeks ago were unprecedented. You chose compassion over procedure, and in doing so you helped my daughter discover her own strength and wisdom. Catherine stepped forward, holding an official-looking document. James, we would like to offer you a new position within the royal household. Instead of just protecting our family's physical safety, we'd like you to serve as a special advisor for family matters, someone our children can turn to when they need guidance from outside the formal structure. James's eyes widened in surprise. Your Royal Highnesses, I'm honored, but I'm not trained in counseling or education. Charlotte giggled. You don't need special training to be kind and wise, Captain Morrison. You just need to care about people. Charlotte is right, William said. What you provided that morning wasn't professional therapy. It was human understanding. That's something no amount of training can teach, and it's exactly what we want available to our children. James looked around the room at the faces of the royal family who had welcomed him into their most private moments. 3 weeks ago, he had been a guard whose job was to remain invisible and silent. Now he was being invited to become a permanent part of their support system. "I would be honored to accept," James said, his voice thick with emotion. Charlotte ran over to James and, in a gesture that would have shocked Mrs. Henderson 3 weeks earlier, gave him a big hug. "Thank you for teaching me that asking for help isn't weak, it's brave." As the group prepared to leave the lesson room, Charlotte took one last look at the restored vase. It sat proudly on its table, beautiful and whole but marked by its experience. The thin lines where it had been repaired didn't detract from its beauty. They added to its story. "You know what?" Charlotte said thoughtfully. "I think that vase is even more special now than it was before." Catherine smiled at her daughter's insight. "Why do you think that, darling?" "Because now it has a story about being broken and becoming whole again. It survived something difficult and came out stronger." Charlotte looked up at her mother with bright eyes, just like people do. William and Catherine exchanged a look of pure pride. Their daughter had learned one of life's most important lessons, that strength comes not from never falling, but from getting back up with grace and wisdom. As they walked out of the lesson room together, Charlotte skipped happily between her parents, while James followed at a respectful distance that was somehow both professional and familial. The tradition had been broken, but in its place, something far more valuable had been built, a family bond that honored both duty and love, protocol and humanity. The crying princess had found her voice, and in doing so, she had changed not just her own life, but the very foundation of how the royal family would face challenges in the years to come.